Before I introduce Dave, a couple of housekeeping things. If you want to visit the book table over here, I would encourage you to quietly do that. They're going to have to pack up as soon as David's gone and go catch a flight. There's a lot of great stuff over there. I have the Bible that they have, and you will learn more American history in that Bible than you will in history class, actually.
Yes.
All right, there was one task I had to do. Also, you have on your tables and in your package, you should have had a program evaluation. We'd appreciate it if you would fill this out because we do read it and we got a lot of good ideas last year to do this year, so please take care of that. I want to, on behalf of Lieutenant Governor Tim Griffin, he was unable to be here today, but he wanted me to make sure that you knew that he was thinking of you. He wishes he could be here, but he is serving our country. He is in the Guard, and this is Guard Weekend, so that's where he is today, and he was saddened he couldn't be here, but he wishes you the best. And then before I bring David up, the last thing I want to tell you about, some of you have signed up for this. I think we've had 58 people sign up already. But we're looking at having, David Barton does U.S. Capitol guided tours occasionally, and we're looking at having one for Arkansans next April 2017, and we're contacting our legislators to see when they can host us. But if you have an interest in doing that, there was a sign-up sheet at the table outside. The cost would be whatever it costs you to get there and find a place to sleep, plus $50. So the tour part is $50, and I'm really looking forward to that. I hope that a lot of you can join us. Okay, did anybody learn anything this morning when David spoke?
Yeah.
You know, he is from Texas, like me. I'm a native Texan. I got here as soon as I could. And we tend to talk slow. If we could just get David to talk a little faster, we can learn even more. David, if you come up before you do your presentation, I have a presentation for you. We do have this history of the Arkansas traveler and the hospitality that the people of Arkansas have, and we have here signed by Governor Hutchinson and Secretary of State Martin. To all who shall see these presents, greetings. Know ye that the Governor of the State of Arkansas, in the name and by the authority of the people of the said state, has vested in him by the Constitution and the laws of the State of Arkansas, reposing special recognition for the distinguished accomplishments, does hereby appoint and commission David Barton as an Arkansas traveler, who is hereby authorized and commissioned to serve as an ambassador of goodwill from Arkansas to the people of other states, the people of nations beyond the borders of the United States, or wherever this ambassador of Arkansas may hereafter travel or reside. Thank you, brother. Thank you. Okay, would you like to hear some more from David Barton?
I'm going to kind of do a bookend with where we started this morning. We had a day full of information, lots of great presenters, lots of great information. And to go back to what we were talking about this morning, that's American exceptionalism. Set up what produces that. I want to show you how it interprets constitutionally as well, because those principles, if you separate the principles of American constitutionalism from American exceptionalism from constitutional interpretation, the document doesn't work well. So American exceptionalism we learned this morning, based on 126 words, 5 immutable principles in the Declaration. And this is where it gets to be fun, because you take the Declaration as a document, and the pushback that we get today from all sides, all sorts of folks, is no, the Constitution is what we take the oath to uphold. We don't take the oath to uphold the Declaration. It's the Constitution we take the oath to uphold. Now, it's interesting. I was recently in Cleveland, And I was the Texas representative to help write the platform for the Republican Party. And I actually have the original party platform from Republicans in 1856, first ever party platform. It's only 9 planks long. Then I've got the second platform from 1860, which is 17 planks long. And then I've got the one from 1864, etc. And it's interesting that in those early platforms, the Republic kept saying, we're the people of the Declaration. We're the people of the Declaration of Independence. The Constitution's a big deal, but they understood that you can't separate it. Now, it's interesting to see the way, let me say it this way, it's interesting to see who it is that disregards the Declaration throughout history. For example, when you were in all the abolition time frame, as you had fights in Congress, you read the records of Congress, and particularly Democrats who were extremely pro-slavery at that time, and they were the ones who pushed all the slavery expansions in Congress. They kept saying, would come in with petitions. John Quincy Adams come in with petitions and said, there's an inalienable right to liberty in the Declaration. Oh no, we do the Constitution. We don't do the Declaration. Our oath is to uphold the Constitution. Nothing in the Constitution says liberty. It's fine. So what they did was they dropped the values of the Declaration. We had the same situation happen now nearly 50 years ago with Roe v. Wade. They said, wait a minute, you can't do abortion. There's an inalienable right to life in the Declaration. I've got a letter from Jack Brooks. He's the Democrat chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. Jack says, oh, no, we don't do the Declaration. We take an oath to uphold the Constitution. The Declaration is not what we do. And so, again, dismiss the values that come forth in the Declaration. And today we get the same thing over the marriage issue. Well, law of nature. Nature's God. Well, we don't do the Declaration. Law of nature, nature's God. That's in the Declaration. We do the Constitution. There's no values in the Constitution. So there is this huge push to separate the Declaration from the Constitution. But you need to understand that historically that's a fallacious thing to do. Sam Adams, the founder of the father of the American Revolution, he said, before the formation of the Constitution, the Declaration was received and ratified by all the states of the Union and has never been disannulled. The Constitution did not set aside the Declaration, as a matter of fact. You had the original 13 states. The next 32 states that came in the United States came in with what were called enabling acts, including Arkansas. The enabling act says that to be a state in the United States, you have to uphold the values of the Declaration and the specifics of the Constitution. You never separated those two. That was always the two documents that were part of becoming a state in the United States. Now, we keep shoving the other one aside because, oh no, there's no values in the Constitution. It doesn't have values in the Declaration. We don't do values. Well, that's a problem when you take values out of the Constitution. So this is what Sam Adams said. You also have John Quincy Adams, same type of statement. John Quincy Adams said the Declaration of Independence was the platform on which the Constitution of the United States was erected. So if you take the Declaration out, you lose the platform. No building's going to stand long without the foundation done. He said the principles proclaimed in the Declaration of Independence were embodied in the Constitution of the United States. Constitution is the Declaration put into specific form. Same thing. And yet if you take the Declaration out, you lose the definition that goes to the Constitution. So what happens as a result? When you see these two documents, the U.S. Supreme Court, back in the day, they used to say, well, if you want to know what original intent is, they said what you need to do, and this was their word, they said you need to determine the evil which is intended to be remedied. For example, if you want to know what separation of church and state means, you need to determine the evil which was intended to be remedied. And the evil was that the government kept taking over religion and religious expression. Separation of church and state was to keep the government from stopping religious expression because that's what they'd done for 1,200 years. It was not to keep people of faith out of the arena. The evil was government kept taking over religion. Well, if you want to know what the Second Amendment's about, you determine all this, you determine the evil to be remedied. That's how you know original intent. So let's do this for a minute. Let's go back to the Constitution. The Constitution has a very unusual clause. Article 1, Section 5, Paragraph 4 says this: neither house during the session of Congress shall, without the consent of the other, adjourn for more than 3 days, nor to any other place than that in which the two houses shall be sitting. Huh? What is that? You'll never understand why that's there unless you understand the evil that was intended to be remedied, and that's in grievance for the Declaration. If you read grievance for the Declaration, it tells you what the issue is. And Article 1, Section 5, Paragraph 4 of the Constitution says, hey, we told you what the problem was. We're solving it right there in the Constitution. You take the Declaration away, that clause means nothing to people today. But if you put them side by side, and you'll find that throughout the constitutional formation, they took the grievances that were in the Declaration and said, we don't like this, we're fixing it right here. This is good, we're fixing it. That's what the two to do. You have to have the two together if you're going to understand the Constitution. Because the Declaration talked about what the problems were with the British government. Now we create our own government, so that's so that we won't do this over here. By the way, here's another one for you. Starting in 1768, Sam Adams led a movement in America that said we have real problems with the British judiciary. The British judiciary is unaccountable and they're appointed for life. That's two things we can't tolerate in America. Now, if you know that and you read Article 3 of the Constitution, you find out, hey, the Constitution does not give lifetime appointments to federal judges. And by the way, it makes them really easy to get out of office. We don't know that today. Well, that's because we don't know what was happening in the American Revolution, the grievances they were dealing with, the Declaration that led up to all this. So, that being said, you cannot separate the Declaration from the Constitution, and the Constitution itself acknowledges that. In the Constitution itself, you have Article 7, which is the attestation clause. It says, done in the Convention by the unanimous consent of the states present the 17th day of September in the year of our Lord, 1787. So the Constitution is dated to 1787 right there, kind of. There's a comma there. That's not a period. That's not the end of the statement. And the independence of the United States of America, the 12th. The Constitution dates itself to the Declaration of Independence. This is the 12th year since the Declaration. Significantly, to this day, every act signed by a President of the United States, starting with George Washington, does not date itself to the Constitution. It dates itself to the Declaration. Every statute, every federal law today does the same. Here's just one I picked out of George Washington. Given under my hand the seal of the United States the 14th day of August, AD 1790, and in the 15th year of the sovereignty and independence of the United States. How come we didn't start dating with the Constitution? We date back to the Declaration. It's that way. The most recent act signed by President Obama dates itself to the Declaration of Independence, not to the U.S. Constitution. They saw the Declaration as the founding document, and now that we've told you the values and the 5 principles that made America great, every single thing in the Constitution has to be interpreted in light of the principles of the Declaration. That's what they always believed, that's what they understood, that's why they never separated. And that's why even the Supreme Court has said the same thing. The Supreme Court said the Constitution is but the body and letter of which the Declaration is the thought and the spirit. It's always safe to read the letter of the Constitution and the spirit of the Declaration of Independence. So all the pushback from people say, oh, we don't take an oath to uphold the Declaration, we just uphold the Constitution. That is trying to use the Constitution as a way to get around what the Constitution is trying to protect. In other words, they're trying to use the Constitution, violate the Constitution, if that makes sense. Anytime you have to throw out the Declaration to get the right result out of the Constitution, you get the wrong result out of the Constitution, if that explains itself. So that's what I want to start with, and setting that tone up. You cannot separate those two documents. So in looking at the Constitution, the other thing that's kind of interesting out there with it is books that are being used right now, including some that are being used by courts and cited in court decisions. And one of the books I point to about the Constitution, because people are wanting to teach the Constitution today, there is this book called The Godless Constitution by a couple of professors out of Cornell University. And they assert that this is a secular document. There are no values in it. There were not any values put in it. The Founding Fathers wrote this document without values, which is the way it's to be interpreted today. They themselves basically were not religious guys anyway. They were atheists, agnostics, deists, and they wanted this document interpreted in that sense. And that like, so the question, and this goes to constitutional interpretation. I tend to be that originalist kind of camp that you go back and see what the evil was they were trying to remedy. And in the sense that it was ratified the people in that day, that's what it means until we ratify it and do something different. We accept it as a contract on the terms then. So you go and you say, well, all right, they say it's a godless document. Is it a godless document? I would immediately argue no. And I would say it's not a godless document, and I would say that there are several reasons or several proofs that it's not a godless document. What are the proofs? Let me start with some of the internal content of the U.S. Constitution. Internal content, one of the interesting clauses in the Constitution that nobody pays attention to today. Now, we did pay attention to it 7 years ago when Obamacare was passed by the House of Representatives. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But the Constitution has a clause called the Sundays Accepted Clause. It's in Article 2 of the Constitution, and it says that the President has 10 days to sign a bill, Sundays accepted. Now, why would you have that clause in the Constitution? What does it matter what happens Well, the courts understood exactly why that was there. You go back to some early court cases. This is what one court said, Charleston v. Benjamin. The court said, Christianity is part of the common law of the land. Oh, by the way, that's the Seventh Amendment of the Constitution. We talked about common law earlier, James Wilson. With liberty of conscience to all. It has always been so recognized. The U.S. Constitution allows it as part of the common law. What? The U.S. Constitution allows Christianity as part of the common law? Yes. The President is allowed 10 days to sign the bill with the exception of Sunday. The observance of Sunday is one of the usages of the common law recognized by our U.S. and state government. Christianity is part and parcel of the common law. In other words, Christianity is the only religion that has a Sunday Sabbath. Now, not every Christian has a Sunday Sabbath, but Christianity as a religion does. You have Sabbatarians, Seventh-day Adventists, etc. But Jewish folks have a Saturday Sabbath. Muslim folks have a Friday Sabbath. The only religion in the world that has a Sunday Sabbath is Christianity. So the Constitution says, whoa, whoa, whoa. Sunday, that's a Christian Sabbath. We don't do work on Sunday. So the President, that day does not count against him. You get to skip that day. Well, Nancy Pelosi decided to pass Obamacare on a Sunday morning. And so she brought Congress in to vote on a Sunday morning. And a number of our guys in Congress said, well, if we're going to be here for Sunday, we'll just have church while we're at the Capitol. And so they resurrected church at the Capitol, which had not been done in 100 years. We're going to be here on Sunday. We're going to make sure this is a religious observance. But nonetheless, the Sunday's Accepted Clause, that's a straight-out, full-frontal recognition of the fact that this is not a secular doctrine. We've already acknowledged Christianity has a role in this, and that's why we don't do things on Sunday on the Christian Sabbath. That does not count against the President in that 10 days for vetoing. So that's one, and with it, this is the map that was laid out when they did Washington, D.C. If you know anything about the order of it, 1787 in the Constitution, they said we're going to choose a 10-mile square piece of property, and that's going to be the federal capital. We don't want a state, because then they're going to feel like they have a vested interest, or we're favoring them by having the government here. We want an independent, neutral piece of property. And so that was ratified by the people, went into effect in 1788. President selected 1789. Washington becomes president. 1790, Congress passes what's called the Residency Act. And they said, President Washington, remember that thing in the Constitution that you helped do that says 10-mile square piece of property? Find it. And so he went over and he negotiated with both Maryland and Virginia to get them to cede some land. That became Washington, D.C. At that point, the Secretary of State is Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson is now in charge of laying out D.C. They get the French architect L'Enfant to help do it. And so they lay it out. This is the original plan for D.C. and they put the Capitol right there, etc. 1791, they get it all laid out. 1793, they break ground, start building the Capitol. In 1800, the Capitol is finished. And the Capitol, when it opened in 1800, is a small square building, not a whole lot bigger than this room right here. It was the original Capitol of the United States. It is now part of the U.S. Capitol, but it's a very small building. And it didn't need to be big because there's only 17 things the federal government's allowed to do anyway. And by the way, the Constitution, the mentality of those guys back then, that's why the Constitution says that Congress has to meet at least once every year. We wish we could get them out of town once a year. Right now, the fact it was not a big deal back then. Congress was not a big, so the Capitol was not that big. However, after they moved in on the 17th, I think it was of November 1800, in the records of Congress 2 weeks later, they've had a discussion. They've decided the House is going to meet in the biggest room, the Senate will meet in this room, the Supreme Court meets over here, and they decide where everybody's going, and then they decided something interesting. It's in the records of Congress. Article 1, Section 5, Paragraph 3 of the Constitution requires that everything said in the floor, House and Senate be recorded in public records. And so they recorded there, and you see it right here, it says, down at the bottom, Thursday, December the 4th. The Speaker informed the House that the chaplains had proposed it would be agreeable to the House to hold divine service every Sunday in their chamber. See, we don't do business at the Capitol on Sunday. It's an open building. Let's have church there on Sunday. And so what happened was you have the House and the Senate that have to agree to this. The Speaker of the House was Theodore Sedgwick. The leader of the Senate was Vice President at that time, Thomas Jefferson. And they say, here's what we'll do. We'll take the chaplain in the House, chaplain in the Senate. They're in charge of the service every Sunday. The House on one Sunday, the Senate on the next. They can preach themselves, or they can find somebody to preach, but every Sunday we're going to have church at the Capitol, and we'll alternate between House and Senate. And so that's how it was set up, Thomas Jefferson there. And it's significant that nearly a century later, by the time you get to 1867, the largest church in Washington, D.C. was the church that met at the U.S. Capitol. 2,000 people a week went to church inside the hall of the House of Representatives. By the way, This little area right there, see that little square right there? That is the original capital of the United States. That's what it was right there. They built the Super Jet in 1807 over here. Then they added this middle part, 1824. They added this in 1857, and then, or this in 1857, and this in 1859. And then this in 1863. By the way, if you go on that tour of the Capitol next year, we'll show you all that. You get to see it from the inside. So that's the original Capitol right there. 2,000 people a week went to church at the Capitol, and you had literally 4 churches that met in the Capitol every Sunday. Why is that? Because the Sunday's acceptance clause. We don't do government work on Sunday. That's God's day. So that's one proof that the Constitution is not a godless document. Another proof is there's a lot of internal things you point to with the oath clauses. There are 5 clauses in the Constitution that require us to take an oath for various things related to government. Sometimes an oath when there's an impeachment, sometimes whatever the oath is when you come into office. Oath clauses. Well, some of the founders who helped write those clauses would include people like Rufus King, signer of the U.S. Constitution. This is what Rufus King said about those 5 oath clauses. He says, in the oath which our laws prescribe, we appeal to the supreme being to deal with us hereafter, which we observe the obligation of our oaths. He said, the pagan world were and are without the mighty influence of this principle proclaimed in the Christian system. We take oaths because when we do, we're telling God, God, I've given you my word. You watch. If I don't do what I told you I'm going to do, you get to whack me. Well, he can do that anyway. We'll give him permission, okay? So what it is an acknowledgement that I answer to God when I take the oath. As he points out, that's part of the Christian system, is the fact that we take oaths this way. You have John Witherspoon, another founding father. He served on over 100 committees in Congress. He was actually one of George Washington's bosses during the American Revolution. Here he is, founding father, sign of our documents. He says, an oath is an appeal to God, the searcher of hearts, for the truth of what we say, and always supposes the calling down of his judgment on us if we lie. We take an oath and don't keep our word, that's judgment coming. He says, persons entering on public office are obliged to make an oath that they will faithfully execute their trust. That's a promise they gave God. He says in vows, there's no party but God and the person who makes the vow. The only 2 people involved in an oath is God and you. He continues, he says, an oath therefore implies a belief in God and his providence, and is indeed an act of worship. Really. There's 5 clauses in the U.S. Constitution that are an act of worship because they require you to take an oath, and that was their view of oaths at the time. You have the same with George Washington, his farewell address when he left office. He gave a dozen warnings to America to keep us on track. He said, guys, when we take those oaths, he says, where's the security? Where's the security for property, for reputation, and for life? If the sense of religious obligation desert our oaths. If our oaths ever become secular, you won't have protection for property or for reputation for life. The only way you'll have property protection is if people are cognizant they answer to God for the word that they give. So that's another part of the Constitution that today we don't see. You see it worked out in all these old documents. I mentioned we have 100,000 documents. These are documents where you see here, so help me God. Look at the top. They didn't just take an oath on the Bible. They took an oath on the holy evangelist of Almighty God. That's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So this is a federal oath form, yeah. And you have another one here, the same thing, in the presence of Almighty God, so help me God. Every time you took an oath, whatever it was a religious document. Here's another one. You have an oath which talks about in the presence of Almighty God. So the whole oath concept, unlike today, was not a secular concept. We do that today kind of like you would put a postage stamp on a letter. We don't even think about it. Back then they did. There are still some congressmen, by the way, who do that. I know a congressman that just before he's sworn in, every year he's reelected, he goes in the Congressional Chapel, which is another thing we'll take you in if you go on that tour. He goes in the Congressional Chapel and he kneels down and he spends significant time in there checking himself out with God, because he knows that when he gives his oath for office, everything he does thereafter is between him and God. He's made a pledge to God. He's accountable to his voters, but he's a whole lot more cognizant of being accountable to God than he is to his voters. And by the way, when you're that, then you get a lot more backbone that way. When you recognize you answer to God, not just voters, you can trick voters on so many things. You know you can't trick God. So you get a lot more backbone when you're cognizant of that. So that's another part of the Constitution that gets overlooked. The Attestation Clause, we briefly mentioned it earlier. Attestation Clause, Article 7. Done in convention by the unanimous consent of the states present 17th day of September in the year of our Lord. They did not have to say that. As a matter of fact, I checked other documents in that day, other state constitutions that day. They did not say in the year of our Lord. Those that the Constitutional Convention did, they said, we've done this in the year of our Lord. That's a religious acknowledgement. Who are they talking about? They talk about the Christian calendar, the Christian system, and the year of their Lord. And so that's another religious acknowledgement in there. When people say it's a secular doctrine, you go, man, you're just blind because there's so many clauses through. But then again, you have to understand a little bit about history to know what they're talking about. So the attestation clause, these are all part of the internal content. And I can show you a lot of other clauses as well, take you through other clauses where you have the same significant content. Let me jump for a minute, just the way the founders viewed the Constitution, the way they oversaw it. The testimony of the delegates themselves, and it needs to go back to the Bible because there's a phrase that is significant in the Bible. Remember in the Bible, you had Egypt and you had the Hebrews were enslaved in Egypt, and so the story of that early part of the Bible is the deliverance of Israel, and they become a nation. God gets them out of Israel, and you know they've been in slavery for a number of years, and God raises up a deliverer to help them. So Moses goes to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh doesn't buy into the release plan, and so as a result, all these plagues happen. But what's significant? You go through the first couple of plagues. The magicians of Egypt said, "We can do that. That's not God. We can do that." And when they get to that third plague, the plague of lice, it's interesting what the Bible says in that third plague. At that point, the Bible says, all the dust of the earth became lice throughout all the land of Egypt. The magicians tried with their secret arts to bring forth lice. Then the magician said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God. We can't do that. We can't duplicate this one. This is definitely a God deal. For all the dust to become lice, that's nothing we can duplicate." So you have that interesting phrase, "This is the finger of God." You also have what happens with the Ten Commandments as the Ten Commandments were given to Moses. Notice what the Scripture says about that. When God had finished speaking with Moses on Mount Sinai, He gave Moses the 2 tablets of testimony, tablets of stone, written by the finger of God. There's that phrase again. God Himself with His finger wrote out the 10 Commandments. You also have what happened with Daniel and the handwriting on the wall in the book of Daniel. God, that finger, the finger of God, wrote on the wall, and that was the end of Belshazzar's reign. You have what Jesus Himself said in Luke 11:20 when He was healing there. The Pharisees came at Him and accused Him of doing the power of Beelzebub. And He said, "If I cast out demons with the finger of God, surely the kingdom of God has come upon you." And there's that finger of God thing again. That's a phrase used time and time and time again in the Scriptures. And what the finger of God actually represents is the Michelangelo painting, but it represents the power and authority of God. Whether it be handwriting on the wall announcing the end of that kingdom, whether it be Jesus with healings, whether it be God writing out the 10 Commandments, whether it be God's power displayed with the Egyptians in a way that the magicians can't duplicate. So keep that phrase in mind. It's interesting to see what folks like Alexander Hamilton said about the Constitution. He was there. He saw it. He was a part in time when the Constitution was falling apart. 5 weeks in, the convention just about fell apart. He was headed back home to New York because they were wasting time. They were bickering so much with each other. Then they had a 3-day recess. They went to church. Washington said they listened to patriotic orations at church. They had a time of prayer. They came back. Jonathan Dayton, delegate, said the whole atmosphere changed. And Hamilton hung around. And what had been confusion for 5 weeks and fighting, bickering for 5 weeks, they end up producing the greatest Constitution in the history of the world. And so as Hamilton looked back on it, this is what Hamilton said about the Constitution. "For my own part, I sincerely esteem the Constitution a system which, without the finger of God, could never have been suggested and agreed upon by such a diversity of interest." God wrote this thing out because we couldn't get it done. We worked 5 weeks. I was going home because I was ticked at everybody. Everybody was ticked at me. We're all ticked at each other. He said this was a finger of God time to do that. You have also James Madison. He's often called the father of the Constitution. James Madison, being there, he made 70 proposals at the Constitutional Convention. 40 of them were voted down. Most of what he proposed didn't get passed. But when he looked back over it at the end, this is his statement. "The real wonder is the Constitutional Convention overcame so many difficulties." Because again, 5 weeks in, they fell apart. They were all going home. It was breaking up. Then they had that time of going to church for 3 days of prayer and patriotic orations. He says, "And to overcome them with so much agreement was as unprecedented as it was unexpected." He says, "It's impossible for the pious men not to recognize in it a finger of that almighty hand, which was so frequently extended to us in the critical stages of the Revolution." God reached down in that Constitution, and that's why we have this thing. Now, notice their terminology. They use the same term the Scripture uses again and again. And for them, that communicated everything. They were very biblically literate back then, unlike people today who don't know what that phrase is in the Bible. They did. You have George Washington. He's considered one of the 4 master builders of the U.S. Constitution. George Washington, when he got it done, he wrote his adopted son, Lafayette, General Lafayette, the 19-year-old that came to help us from France. He wrote Lafayette. He says, we've done it. We have a Constitution. He says, as to my sentiments with respect to the new Constitution, it appears to me little short of a miracle. He says, it demonstrates as visibly the finger of providence as any possible event in the course of human affairs can ever designate. If God's finger has ever been anywhere, it intervened right here in the Constitution Convention. Now look at all these delegates saying the same thing, using the same phrase. Then you have Ben Franklin. He's the guy who got them to recess for 3 days and then went to church and heard those patriotic orations. Franklin was elated. He's the first guy in American history to call for the United States of America. He did it 33 years before the Constitutional Convention. He's trying to get them to create the United States. Nobody's more elated than he is because he's had this vision for the longest of all of them. And he looked back on it, and Franklin said this. He says, I may not be understood to infer that our General Convention was divinely inspired to reform the federal Constitution. We're not saying this is the equivalent of the Bible. We're not saying that God entered the prophets who wrote that down and that they're writing down God. We're not saying that we have the inspiration that the prophets did in writing the Bible. He said, but I must own that I have so much faith in the general government of the world by providence that I can hardly conceive a transaction of such momentous importance should be suffered to pass without being influenced, guided, and governed by that omnipotent, omnipresent, and beneficent ruler in whom all inferior spirits live, move, and have their being. So I'm not telling you that this is inspired like the Bible, but I am telling you that God did this. There's no way this got done without God, and I love omnipotent, omnipresent, beneficent ruler in whom all spirits have their being. He intervened. He showed up. That's how we got the Constitution. And Benjamin Rush, who lived there in the city, John Adams said he's one of the 3 most notable founders. He's one of the signers of the documents as well. Benjamin Rush, who was in Philadelphia, watched the conventions that fell apart, watched as the 3 days happened, watched as they came back together. Benjamin Rush says, I don't believe the Constitution is offspring divine inspiration. This is not the Bible we're talking about here. He says, but I'm as perfectly satisfied that it's as much the work of divine providence as any of the miracles recorded in the Old and New Testament. This is not the Bible, but you won't find a miracle in the Bible that's any bigger than what happened here. People being raised from the dead, Red Sea parting, pick any miracle you want. Nothing's bigger than what God did here at the Constitutional Convention. Now, this is not the Bible. It's not the same level as the Bible, but God still did. So, you know, you take their testimony. Did they see this as a secular enterprise? I don't think so. So how come we interpret it as a secular document, as a secular enterprise? That was not their thinking at all. So the testimony of the delegates themselves was also very clear. So is it a godless constitution? No, and I can go through other proofs as well. There's several more I can go through, but in the interest of time, I want to keep moving on with the right way to approach the Constitution from an attitude standpoint. Now, when you look at what we have in the godless Constitution, why do we care? The reason we care, I think, was given very well by a legal writer in the early 1800s. Legal writer is a man named Stephen Cowell. He wrote a number of legal books that were used across the nation in this early 1800s, and he said something very significant about how you interpret the document the way it was created. It's back to original intent type of stuff. He said, it was in the very spirit of true Christianity that the hospitality and blessings of the United States were offered to all the world. In other words, we were Christian folks here, but we invited everybody in. It didn't have to be Christian, which is why we had Muslims here in 1619. We had the first Jewish synagogue by 1640. You had Hindus with temples here in 1800. You had all these people. As Christians, we want everybody to have religious liberty. Now, we're going to tell you about our faith, but we're not going to coerce you to use our faith. So, as Christian, that spirit of Christianity, we wanted blessings for everybody. Come live under our Constitution. Doesn't matter what your religious belief is. When you get here, you're going to be blessed by what we've created, what these Christian people have created. He continues, says, it was in that very spirit of true Christianity that the hospitality and blessings of the United States were offered to all the world. All were invited to enjoy it. He said the Christian men of that day intended that the nation should continue to be a Christian nation. He says they did not place Christianity beneath nor over their political institutions. Rather, Christianity was the atmosphere which they breathed to administer it. He said it was a source of their inspiration, and they sought to make the blessings available for human advantage. In other words, where they got, and I have a different presentation, I can show you the number of Bible verses that are used in the Constitution. The fact that we have two sections in the Constitution that authorize death penalty, and the fact that they quote from the Bible specifically and how death penalty is administered. The fact that we require the President to be a natural-born citizen is quoted out of Deuteronomy 17:15 in the Constitution. There's so many Bible verses they quoted as they went through this, because so many of those at the Constitution Convention literally were not only Christians, a number of them were theologians. You had Abraham Baldwin signing the Constitution, professor of divinity at Yale. You have Roger Sherman, professor of divinity at Yale. He's a signer of the Constitution, third most active member of the Constitution. I can show you all the theologians who were involved in creating these clauses. So this is the atmosphere, and that's the word that I want you to see, is that these institutions and laws were to be the instruments of Christian men for the good of the whole human family. Everybody gets the benefits of what they did. But the phrase there is that Christianity was the atmosphere. Now the reason the atmosphere is significant is, consider what happened with space exploration when we went from Earth to the moon. You got the moon, you got a whole different atmosphere. If you try to take your helmet off of the moon and breathe, you'll die, because that atmosphere doesn't work there. You have to use the atmosphere in which it was created if you're going to stay alive. And that was Christianity's atmosphere. That's the way the Constitution, if you make that a secular document, it will not work right. Democrats have tried to do that since slavery days. They want the values gone. You know, slavery and abortion and marriage and everything else. It'll never work right if you take the value system out of it. And that's what we understood for all of those years. Jedediah Morse, a founding father, he was an early guy in the federal government. He wrote the first history on the American Revolution. Jedediah Morse said this. He said, to the kindly influence of Christianity, we owe that degree of civil freedom and political and social happiness which mankind now enjoy. And again, they're not being exclusive. Look, we as Christian guys, this is what we wanted everybody to enjoy. We took principles out of the Bible and made it available to everybody. They said, in proportion as the genuine effects of Christianity are diminished in any nation, in the same proportion will the people of that nation receive from the blessings of genuine freedom. The more secular you become, the less freedom you have in your nation. It's what we see in France, it's what we see in Germany, it's what we see in Greece, it's what we see in Morocco. So you just go across the world. As those blessings of religion go down, so does freedom go down. So John Adams said it this way. John Adams said, this is 1798, he's talking in the military, he said, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It's wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Our Constitution will not work if you don't keep those moral and religious aspects part of it. Now, we got a wonderful Constitution. It's a great document. We love it. We should be teaching it. Federal law requires every public school district on September the 17th of every year, that's the day they signed the Constitution, 1787, requires every public school district to set aside the day to teach the Constitution. 90% of public schools do not do that at all, even though it's required by law. We have so few people who actually know what the Constitution says. People who take an oath to uphold their oath of office, I can ask them 3 questions and know whether they have a clue what the Constitution means. If I ask simply, what are the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment? If I ask, how many articles are there in the Constitution? And how many amendments in the Bill of Rights? If you can't answer those questions, then you have no clue what the necessary proper clause is. You don't know what the interstate commerce clause is. You don't know what the general welfare clause is. You don't know what the necessary and proper clause is. You don't know what the immunities and limitations. You don't know any of the clauses. If you can't answer the boundaries around the football field, you don't know any of the plays that happen on the football field. And those 3 easy questions, if people cannot answer that, I guarantee you they cannot tell me what Article 3 says about how to limit federal judicial activism. Won't have a clue what that is. And that's why knowing the Constitution is important, but you have to know the atmosphere in which it was created, because then you can understand what it's trying to do and what it is. So we got a great Constitution. Is it a godless document? No. But here's the problem we have today. These professors, Kramnik and Moore, we're into a period of experts, where the experts know everything. And these guys here, why would they say that it's a godless document? What basis would they choose for doing that? Now, I've shown you just out of the Constitution itself just a few clauses out of many that make it very clear it's not a secular, godless document. What do they? Well, you go to their footnote page, note on sources. Oops. We have dispensed with the usual scholarly apparatus of footnotes. It's revisionism. That's how it works. Hey, we're PhDs. We know what we're talking about. You can trust us. We've been educated in it. See, that's the expert mentality, and we defer to experts today who have no brains. And so, they would not let a freshman in college get away with writing a research paper in their own classes with no footnotes, and yet they do it. I'm at the point where I've got a PhD, but I often ask now, how many PhDs does it take to make you stupid? Because we're at the point where we've lost common sense on so many aspects of things. And so this is what you need to understand. We've got a wonderful document. That document, that was the atmosphere we used. Let me close with some good quotes of the Constitution. George Washington said, "The Constitution is the guide which I will never abandon." It'd be really good if we knew what it was. It'd be even better if we knew the atmosphere that produced all those great clauses in the Constitution. You have here President Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln said, "Don't interfere with anything in the Constitution. That must be maintained, for it's the only safeguard of our liberties." He said, we the people are the rightful masters of both Congress and the courts. Well, we don't know that today. Not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who pervert the Constitution.
Yes.
That's what it's supposed to do. And by the way, I've been asked this year to help 2 colleges start schools of government. And so we're about to launch that first school of government in the fall. It's a school up in Colorado. And that college up in Colorado, pretty interesting stuff. The textbook that we use for teaching the Constitution is from 1828. It's a textbook that was given to elementary kids with 100 questions on the Constitution. I don't think most Supreme Court justices can answer what elementary kids answered in 1828. So we have a textbook from 1828. We moved to a Constitution textbook from 1831, and then one from 1841. And then as we move into government, we use an 1843 textbook. We're just going back to all the old stuff, because that's when it all worked so well, and it worked well as long as we kept applying. Today, we don't know what it is. So, Constitution is really important to know. You can do that even through old books. President Thomas Jefferson said, "In questions of power, then let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the change to the Constitution." It's a great document if we use it. President Calvin Coolidge said this. He said, "The more I study the Constitution, the more I realize that no other document devised by the hand of man has brought so much progress and happiness to humanity." He said, "To live under the American Constitution is the greatest political privilege that was ever afforded to the human race." And then you got Daniel Webster, who says this. Daniel Webster says, "Hold on, my friends, to the Constitution and to the Republic for which it stands. Miracles do not cluster, and what has happened once in 6,000 years may not happen again." We've got a once in world history opportunity with this Constitution. Don't screw it up. Don't let it get away from us. So going back to that document, preserve it. See, that's the mentality we need to have as liberty people, as constitutional people. Go back to preserving the original intent, because then it worked. You cannot use a screwdriver as a shovel. It was not made for that. And to try to use the Constitution to do things it was not made for, or that violates the purpose for which it's made, it'll never work out right. You get maximum performance when you use it the way it was intended to be used. So that's what I wanted you to see with some of the background of the Constitution, how it came to be. Again, if you're interested, it's got stuff up here on the table that'll help you with that. Randy, back to you, sir. Let you have it.
See what I mean? Wow. We have a little bit of time left. And David, we want to take some questions.
Yes, sir.
From folks. I think we have a couple of people with mics out there. If you have a question for David, if you raise your hand, we'll bring the mic to you. Sir, back here in the center.
I've heard that Thomas Jefferson said that
I'm sorry, say it again. You heard what?
Thomas Jefferson
Jefferson, got it.
said, I don't know if it's true or not, you may know, something about a revolution is good for a country every 200 years or something to that effect.
Yeah, Jefferson has multiple statements on revolution being good, that you don't want to get necessarily set and fixed in things. And so that was part back when he was supporting the French Revolution. They were trying to get rid of kings, but the problem was they kept having revolutions. And so at the time that statement was made, it's different from what he said later in life. He said that early on, this is supporting what the French did. But as Robespierre and Voltaire and those guys got a hold of that, you had, what, 3 French revolutions in 10 years, I think it was? That's not what he was after. So people often use that quote from Jefferson. When you take the other quotes he said and put around it, that was at a specific period of time where he thought it was really good that Europe started having revolutions and throw off some of those kings that they had. Historians now call that the Age of Revolution, because everybody had a revolution back there, it seems. France had 3 while George Washington's president. You had the Grecian Revolution, the Helvetic Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, the Italian Revolution, the French Revolution. Everybody had a revolution. The difference is they kept having revolutions and we didn't. We stopped with one.
Well, he's saying it takes longer if you have one.
What's that?
Is he saying it take longer if you had one?
Well, he wanted revolutions because they needed a whole different system of government. Monarchies ruled the world at that point in time, and it needed to be a republican form of government, small r. And so those revolutions were really good things to have. But then you had the oligarchies that came out of revolutions, as they did in France. France went into that oligarchy rather than having they called it the French Republic, and it never was. It was an oligarchy. It was the ruling class that killed everybody else. And that was always a problem. They lacked the moral and religious values, and that's where Jefferson actually ended up having a lot of conflicts over people like John Adams and George Washington and others, was they said, those guys don't have any religious values. It's going to be a disaster for them to have a revolution. And Jefferson said, no, they need a revolution. Well, they had it, and it was a disaster. And so the argument was, and the conclusion finally was that, having a revolution for the sake of revolution is not a good deal if you don't have moral and religious people to implement stability afterwards. And so that's where Jefferson and those guys went through about 10, 15 years of conflict with each other. And you'll find them later in life coming back to the position that they held, that you can't have a revolution for the sake of revolution. You have to have it for morality and religion, otherwise it will not last.
Got a question right here.
Okay. David, I understand you have done a lot of counsel to state legislators and U.S. legislators, but have either of the current presidential campaigns sought your counsel?
One definitely hasn't.
Which one is that? Which one would that be?
What's her name? The other one definitely has reached out, and we've helped do some things with them, putting some events together. We'll see how it goes, but they're looking for input, looking for help.
Okay, good to hear.
My question right over here, stage left.
All right, who's your favorite founding father and why?
I have a whole bunch of favorites. What I choose to do is I tend to choose founders that I would call lesser lights. I mean, Washington, huge favorite. Franklin, all those guys, what they did was just unbelievable. But I tend to pick people like Benjamin Rush, or like a John Quincy Adams, or like a John Jay, because they did almost as much and they're totally unknown today. So for me, Benjamin Rush probably is the guy who had the most impact on me as a Christian. He was a strong Christian, strong biblical guy. And let me just run down the credentials real quick. Tell me why we haven't heard about this guy. Ben Rush, John Adams said, the 3 most notable founding fathers are George Washington, Ben Franklin, and Benjamin Rush. Now, how come we hear about 2, not the 3rd that was the most notable? Benjamin Rush is the greatest physician in American history. To this day, he's called the father of American medicine. He was professor of medicine at 3 universities at the same time. He came up with medical cures we're still dealing with today. He's the guy who came up with preventative medicine. As a matter of fact, he said, you know what? If you'll brush your teeth, you can stop tooth disease. Nobody knew that back then. He was way ahead of the curve. I have his writings where 200 years ago he said, well, we now know it. We now know that smoking tobacco causes lung cancer and chewing tobacco causes mouth cancer. 200 years ago, he already had that tag. 3,000 medical students got their degrees with his name on the diploma. He started 5 universities, 3 of them still go today. He did the first academic education for women, helped break that mold of education being male only. He is the huge civil rights leader, started the first abolition society in America, led the national abolition movement, trained the first black physicians in America, helped start the first black denomination in America. He did the first faith-based prison reform in America. He was the director of the U.S. Mint. He was an economist. He also he signed the Declaration, ratified the Constitution. He served in 3 different presidential administrations. He started the Sunday school movement in America. He started the first Bible society. I keep going. By the way, he's called the father of public schools under the Constitution. As much as we think about education, wouldn't we talk about it? We don't talk about it. And he is a massive figure, and we don't talk about it because he doesn't fit any money. After all the founding fathers are a bunch of racists and bigots. Well, he's not, because he started the abolition movement. After all, the founding fathers are a bunch of atheists, agnostics, deists. Well, he's not, because he started the Sunday school movement and the Bible. He doesn't fit any mantra that they want to talk about today. So in reading his writings, he, as a Christian, challenged me, because back when I started this, I'd read those writings and I said, you know, I disagree with him. And the problem was, he put a Bible verse beside what he said. So unless I could come up with a better Bible verse than he did, he wins the argument. And it was the first time I started having to learn to try to think biblically, because I saw him applying the Bible and instant after instant to all these issues I never thought about applying the Bible to. And so he's the one who really helped me see the Bible as applicable to all these things, and how they thought about it, and how that it was the atmosphere, and how that they used it for saying the president's got to be a natural born citizen and death penalty and all these other things. It was revolutionary to me. So I'd say probably Benjamin Rush had the greatest impact on me.
Got a question right here. Right over here.
I'm like, there we go, got it.
As to what you just said about agnostic, deist, about our founders, which we've all heard about.
Yeah.
Why is it throughout everything you talked about, Christianity was mentioned? How do you balance these two? How do you make sense of it when someone says they weren't Christians and they weren't godly?
The only way you can make sense out of the way that they're deists and yet Christians is you can't teach history. You just got to say they're a bunch of atheists, agnostics, deists, like that Godless Constitution book does, and show no footnotes. And if you can keep people from seeing what the history is, then you can make those stupid claims. But if you ever have to start documenting stuff, one of the claims that I really think is kind of humorous is the historian, or the director of historical studies at Mount Vernon, of all places. He's a guy, he says George Washington was a deist. Now it's interesting, you have to understand how we got there. Washington's writings came out the first time in 1832. 12 volumes of Washington's writings done by Jerry Sparks. He's the president of Harvard. He's also a chaplain in Congress. He did the first volume of Washington's writings. Volume 12, the end section, deals with the faith of George Washington. And in that, you had Jerry Sparks, who wrote to all the guys who knew Washington were still alive, so tell me about his faith. And John Marshall said he was a Christian. His daughter, Nellie, said he was a Christian. Nellie said, you might as well question his patriotism as question his Christianity. And he went through all these guys who said, Christian, Christian. And so in 1855, a book came out by John Frederick Schroeder called The Maxims of Washington. He took the 12 volumes and pulled out all 50 statements. The statements on agriculture, the statements on the military, the statements on taxation. And one of the sections was statements on religion. And in each section, he used the guys who actually knew Washington to introduce that. So as a military guy, here's all these generals talking about him. As a congressional guy, here's all these political guys. Well, as a faith, as a religion, here's all these guys who said, he's a Christian. I knew him. And so that's the way that book was until 1987. And Mount Vernon republished the Maxims of Washington, 1832, 1855, now they're reprinted 1987. And they took all the eyewitness testimony out. And the scholar there at Mount Vernon said, oh, George Washington's a deist. What happened to all the eyewitnesses? And he says he's a deist because he used the word providence in his writings. Now, the reason that's significant is if you look at your Bible today, depending on which edition, which version you use, the word providence will only appear from 1 to 4 times. I think in 1 times in King James, I think it's no times in NIV, I think it's 4 times in Amplified. 1 to 4 times, that's all you see providence. We don't use the word today. Let's go back to the Bible they used back then, the Geneva Bible. The Geneva Bible used the word providence 144 times. George Washington simply repeating what their Bible said. That makes him a deist because he quotes the Bible? That's how stupid that argument is. So the way they get away with doing that is they separate us from the knowledge of our history. And I'm going to jump on this real quick. This is a longer question answer than what I intend to give. You guys need to understand Right now in America, only 3% of American colleges teach the free market economic system. And you think about what that means for the next generation of leaders. Abraham Lincoln said the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation is the philosophy of the government in the next. You know why all those college kids are Bernie kids? 84% of college kids support Bernie? Because they've never even heard what the free market system is. They've never been exposed to it at all. Everything they've heard about socialism, Bernie's it. Let's go for Bernie. Now let me jump on history. American Council of Alumni and Trustees, the alumni of colleges, the trustees of colleges, they do an annual report on how we do academically with colleges. This year was on history. The top 76 colleges in America listed in U.S. News and World Report. They looked at history majors in those colleges. So these are people who teach us history, right? Only 11 of the top 76 colleges require any course in American history for their history majors. 5 out of 6 colleges, you go through American history, you get no, and you go through a history major, you get no American history in your history major at all. That's your next group of history teachers in schools right there. In September of 2014, we adopted the new standards for the AP history test for high school kids. 460,000 kids take this. In World War II, and the standards for World War II, there is no Hitler, there is no Nazi, there is no Holocaust, there is no D-Day, there is no Pearl Harbor, there is no Battle of Midway, there is no Battle of the Bulge, there is no Eisenhower, there is no Patton, there is no MacArthur, they're gone. What is there is 6 statements about America, they're all negative. One says, if we dropped an atomic bomb on Japan, raising questions about American values. All 6 are negative. That's what we're getting in history. So, long answer to a short question, the reason they get away with doing this is we know nothing about who we were as people. We don't know this stuff anymore. This is brand new stuff, and kids definitely don't get it. So if you got kids or grandkids, make the assumption they're getting everything wrong, everything. And you're going to have to spend some time in getting them the right information. I recommend you get them biographies to read, old biographies. You can go to Google Books, books.google.com. You can download millions of books free, PDF. Get some old biographies of George Washington. Get Aaron Bancroft's 1800 biography of Washington. Get the 1849 biography of John Quincy Adams by Josiah Quincy. By Sewell's another great one of John. Print them. Let these kids read them. It's a whole different view of American history than what they will get today. That's how you preserve the country, is go back and start teaching stuff that we're trying to hide right now.
Got another question over here.
Mr. Barton, maybe you can acknowledge and make sure I have my facts straight so I can set this question up. Okay. Former state representative from Texas, correct?
Me? No, ma'am.
No?
I helped run the state party in Texas. My
Okay.
position was as a state
Okay.
party leader.
But as a party, as a leader in the state, you were able to work to change and get the history books corrected. You worked very hard with the legislature to get that to happen, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
In Arkansas, as a legislator, I was able to, with the help of many people, a few days before the last filing of the bill, the state of Arkansas's education department decided they were going to cut out the early history of our founding and early history. Just decided on their own to do that, and we all were surprised. Did we hear that right? And so we worked very hard. Some educators got together. We all asked a lot of questions. I stayed in Little Rock for the last 4 days because the only thing we could do was get the information, move swiftly, and file a shell bill to hold the spot to figure out what the heck we were going to do. And I did that. So with the help of some others, we put the bill together. And literally, I mean this, the Lord's blessing, because there's so many bills filed, to be able to get that bill through, and it passed through the, I'm not an educator, but I want my children, my grandchildren educated. I want them to know what the people sacrificed to come here to be able to have religious freedom, and the founding fathers and what that meant, what that means in America. Because we don't have that, we're never going to know where we're going to go. You've got to know where you came from and why we were great America. But it went through the Senate, the committee, the floor, sailed through. It gets to the House, we get it through there. And because we were able to ask the right questions, it was very hard for some in the House to vote against it. It passed the last day on the House floor. What should not have happened, and I mean this with all my heart, with the blessings of the Lord, that passed. So we're able to be able to say that founding history should be taught in Arkansas. Tell us how that we can make sure that in Arkansas, that we can make sure that our education department continues to teach founding history, because we're losing our America. We've got to fight for it. We've got to stand for it. We've got to be willing to go after it. But tell us what more we can do to make sure that we're being able to teach our children that founding history that we know that makes us great, because how can they go after and help us save this America, like for what we knew it to make it that great? Help us. Tell us what we can do.
A couple of things I would throw out, and first, what you just stopped with that bill is Tennessee is going to America now. There are now a dozen states that high school that teach what's called the 20th century model. You start American history at 1900 to go forward. Nothing happened before 1900. So you've got a dozen states that now teach as the model. That's what you stopped here. The way you do that, and part of it is, I would ask more process questions, but the way we have done it in other states is we say no textbook can be used in the state to teach in the schools unless it conforms to the specific standards that we've passed adopted. For example, that you have to start history back in the founding era. What we do is through the state boards of education, we will get those standards in place, and then school districts say, well, we want the 20th century model. I hate the founding fathers. Those are really bad guys. It doesn't matter what the school principal says. You've got to use the right kind of textbooks. So getting the right kind of textbooks is key. Right now, the problem we have in all the states is they're getting away from textbook publishers. A decade ago, we had 12 national publishers' textbooks. We're now down to 3 because everybody's going online. And because they're going online, you can make a change in curriculum that quick online. So we've had to require that curriculum changes have to be, online curriculum changes have to be approved through the State Board of Education. And people say, well, you're micromanaging. No, we're setting minimum standards, just like we do with seatbelts or anything else. We're saying you can do everything. So there are minimum standards you have to set, and minimum standards are that you ought to know about the founding of America. I think Arkansas, actually, I think you guys, I don't know if it's being enforced, but you guys are one of the 7 states that have a Celebrate Freedom Act, I think. Randy, do you remember that got passed when you were there? You guys may not have, I thought Arkansas was, but Celebrate Freedom Act says that every year, once a year, you have to take an entire week out of school for grades 3 through 12, and you have to teach the Declaration of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and how they've been applied over time. And you have to memorize the key 56 words from the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, they're endowed by the Creator of certain animal rights. You have to memorize it. Every kid from 3rd through 12th grade has to know that. So that's one. That's something you can do. There's also what's called the American Heritage Education Act, which says in the classrooms, we encourage you to post founding documents, and they cannot be edited based on their religious content. So you can have George Washington's farewell address up with all the religious content. You can have one of the textbooks used in public schools now has Patrick Henry's Give Me Liberty, Give Me Death speech, except they take out all the God portions and put ellipses in there. The God part's gone. So the American Heritage Education Act encourages the posting of founding documents and Supreme Court cases and other things, and you can't edit it based on religious content. There's a number of things that can be done. I would probably need to talk with you and see how your State Board of Education interfaces with the legislature, but finding out how that happens are some things we can do. And I'm assuming, do you guys have an elected State Board of Education here? Or is it
no, it's appointed. One of the things we could do is get rid of the State Board of Education.
Appointed as bats like judges, been appointed. All the states that have elected judges. See, in Texas, we've got elected judges at every level, and we've had our state judges that have struck down our marriage amendment, and our state judges that have struck down our adoption laws on same-sex couples. And that's fine. They do it because they never get reelected the next time. I mean, it lasts for no more than 2 years. It's gone. And because everybody's accountable to the electorate, we just don't have that kind of activism. If you're going to have a State Board of Education, it ought to be elected because then you can get at these guys. They are filling your kids' brains with something, and you better make sure they're accountable to you and not to the educrats and the bureaucrats across the state. So whether it be abolishing it or turning it into an elected thing or whatever, they got to be accountable to something.
Okay, here's the last question right here. You got to keep it real short because we're out of time. Okay.
All right, Captain.
Dave, we all want to just thank you for your spectacular 2 presentations. And for proving the Judeo-Christian background of our Declaration and our Constitution. My question is, I seem to remember, and if I have this wrong, please correct me, that you wrote a book that then was challenged, and your publisher then stopped publishing it, and I think it's being published again. Can you tell us the background of that and what happened, please?
Yeah, I have a bunch of critics that are high, they're loud mouths and they're well paid for. George Soros spends a lot of money on me. I guarantee what I've said right here will be blogged about by this evening with some of the Soros bloggers. And so they're paid to follow me everywhere and hear everything I say, and they will pick things out. Right Wing Watch does that. There's a lot of organizations that are paid to knock me down. I cannot even get my own page changed on Wikipedia. They won't change anything. All the Soros people write the page in Wikipedia, so don't ever look me up there because I'm really evil. I don't even like myself when I read that page. So, they're very aggressive at that, and they said, you know, the problem with Barton is we haven't got people from his own side to get him, so they got about half a dozen professors, and these half dozen Christian professors came out with an attack on a book I wrote on Thomas Jefferson. And I told the publisher at that time that they're going to attack you, and here's what they'll do, but don't worry about it. Here's all the documentation. 11 cases documentation. When they say this, here's the actual records themselves from Jefferson. Here, you know, I mentioned we've got all these letters. So when it got attacked by these 6 guys, it got picked up and broadcast. You know, MSNBC does their thing, and all these guys do their thing like they do. But the publisher, for whatever reason, never even called me. They turned tail and ran and said, we pulled the book. We don't have any confidence. What do you mean? We've got all the documentation. Well, it turned out that it had been sold to another entity at that point in time. The other entity said, I don't want any controversy over anything. Rupert Murdoch had actually bought Thomas Nelson, and at that point in time didn't want any controversy. So they dumped the book, which then allowed the source people to say, it's been pulled because of inaccuracies. Barton got it all wrong. Well, another publisher came to us and said, it was a New York Times bestseller when they pulled it. That's unprecedented. Nobody pulls a New York Times bestseller. And so they came back and said, we'll republish it as long as you put in their chapter rebutting what the professor said. Happy to. So it came back out in January. It's doing very well. We took all the professors and just took them apart. I let Jefferson take them apart, quite frankly. We just took Jefferson's books. And they've all gone dark and gone silent. So now everybody's still talking about the Thomas Nelson book that got pulled. But if you want to have a lot of fun, you need to read the Thomas Jefferson Lies, the current edition of it, because it shows you what academics are arguing in the academic world, and it gives you all sorts of ammunition knocking down on Facebook, because your kids are getting the same things that they came after me with. And so kids that stand up and try to defend America's founding, that's what it is. So that's a controversy. It's a tempest in a teapot, except for people who have a lot of money like Soros who can keep this alive, and that's what they're very good about doing. Just keep things alive. Thank you guys for being here.